Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Reform UK, the right-wing populist party in the UK run by, it is his own private company, it really is, run by Nigel Farage, and kind of Brexit as well, and EU. It's back on the agenda. There's a lot of talk at the moment with regard to the UK getting closer to the EU, possibly that being a campaign strategy for Labour going forward with the growth and popularity of Reform. But then Reform have been dipping in the polls recently, and Labour have been going up as there have been successes that have been underappreciated by the electorate since the media landscape is so skewed. So there's lots going on here. And meanwhile, the Reform UK party is hoovering up all of these Conservative MPs and Conservative, people associated with the Conservative Party, such that they look like the Tory Party 2.0, rather than being this viable alternative to these two mainstream parties, Labour and Conservatives. And it makes it very difficult for Reform to say, oh, this is broken Britain, look what's happened, we've had 14 years of Conservative rule, we need to change. And then they employ all of the people that got the UK into that position by 14 years of those parliamentarians being in power. It's really bizarre situation. So we're going to look at a bunch of this. Before we do so, please remember to like, subscribe and share. It helps out the channel and keeps you in the loop. Thank you to those who have already done so. Now, we're going to start, first of all, by looking at Starmer going to China, and he's presently in Japan. Now, I've talked about this a number of times recently. He has gone to China. A bunch of things have been achieved, although they've been really downplayed by the right-wing press in the UK, saying that he went to China and capitulated. That's what the Daily Mail was saying. And what that was it type thing. You went to China and, but there are a lot of things that have taken place, and we look like we're going to have energy investment into China from Octopus Energy. We've had sanctions lifted on MPs and peers in the UK. We have, looks like there's going to be Chinese investment into the car industry in the UK, a Jaguar Land Rover, getting together possibly with Chery, I think, and there being a European headquarters for Chery in Liverpool, which is a Chinese car manufacturer, and a bunch of other stuff. So there is actually more, I think, that has been achieved than meets the eye. And then he's gone over to Japan as there's been this pivot away from the United States, because what happened post-Brexit, actually, before we look at this. So essentially, and I've talked to you a lot about this before, but economically, Brexit isn't going to work because we're moving outside of the biggest trade bloc in the world and going it alone, and therefore throwing off all of the amazingly good trade deals sorted out by the EU, and then having to renegotiate those trade deals, but from a much less powerful position. Okay, so it's never going to work. We're always going to be worse off economically than we were in Brexit. I think it was hard to win the economic argument. You can talk about sovereignty, you can talk about immigration, and even that I would argue didn't go particularly well for the Brexiteers. But in terms of the economy, you are making yourself a minnow in a shark's tank. And one of the things was, Trump is going to be our biggest ally after Brexit. This is literally what people like Jacob Rees-Mogg were saying. Like, they were saying Trump is going to be our ally. And this was back in 2016 to 2020, and then obviously 2025 onwards. That's not the case. So we were promised success with doing these great trade deals with all these countries, and actually the United States appears to want to bully us. And although we had slightly preferential tariffs, for example, compared to the EU, he actually dislikes the EU even more. They weren't. It wasn't great, and actually we didn't have the security blanket of being in the EU, to the point where you've had a number of people saying that as a result of being outside of the EU, the UK is weaker against Trump. So Macron, Daily Telegraph reports that Macron allies blame Brexit for Starmer's weakness over Trump. Brexit is why Starmer is weak with Trump. Inside the EU, you have leverage, a market of 460 million and a trade bazooka. Outside it, you urge calm while others decide. Brexit left Britain weak and Trump knows it. And there is definitely a truth to that. So anyway, pivoting away from the United States, Starmer has had to go to China, to the EU, and to China and to other allies like, Norway, Canada, and he is presently in Japan trying to drum up some positive economic news. But I thought this was a really interesting analysis of him going to China. And again, it pertains to Brexit. This is Sky News reporting, although the audio, because it's recorded off the TV with a camera, isn't great.
To put that in contrast to some of our European counterparts, Macron's been here a number of times in the post-COVID years. The Germans have been here a number of times. We are frankly seen as a nation that is A, slightly closer to the US than others, and B, having just not made the efforts, not made the sort of overtures of some of our counterparts. And also, we're seen as a nation that perhaps is just a smaller player than some of those others. Post-Brexit in particular, Brexit, a decision that just confuses the Chinese, frankly. So in that context, look, the Chinese are pleased, I think, that the British leader is coming, but it will all be treated relatively, I think.
It's interesting to hear the sort of brutal reality there. I think of how we're viewed on the world stage. Can I ask?
And that's it, the brutal reality. People in the UK don't like to hear this, but essentially, outside of, say, Trump world, in the European sphere and in, say, China looking to be dominant and thinking, well, if you were a country that was wanting to be dominant like us, you would want to be in the most dominant trade arrangement that you could, right? So what are you doing? Why have you opted out of this? And now you're sitting there on your own. You're now less important. We don't care so much about you. We cared more about you when you were influencing within the EU and when you were part of the EU as a major trade adversary or partner or competitor or whatever, however you want to see it. And that's the reality. And I know those of you who voted Brexit are going to be spitting at the screen now because you're like, no, it was brilliant. It was great for, and whatever. Okay. Tell me tangibly what it was great for, what was achieved and how does it make us more powerful? How are we more powerful now outside of the EU, given the global geopolitical fractions and fractiousness around the world there is? The oscillations and earthquakes even that have taken place over the years since 2016. How are we stronger outside? And there will be some advantages of being outside, but I think economically speaking, we are going to be struggling. So then it at the moment, when you're trying to evaluate what Keir Starmer is doing and how Labour government have done, it's very difficult to get past the disinformation and propaganda. I was speaking to someone yesterday. He said, I'm thinking about moving to Canada because it's all going to crap in the UK. I was like, yeah, I know you think that, but you've got to be careful about what you read. Because I was speaking just an hour before that, I was speaking to my in-laws who were telling me how terrible, how broken Britain is. I'm like, okay, that's like Reform UK rhetoric, but you are aware that murder rates are at the lowest in 50 years, that knife crimes down, I think 9% in all and 23% in London, is it, or something like that? And there are loads of good indicators for the economy. The stock market's been doing really well for 12 months in a row, I think. And there is a lot to house building. There's a housing crisis essentially in the UK, and there needs to be a complete reform in planning, and you need to get a lot of houses built, and that's looking like it's turning around. So there are loads of really interesting green shoots all over the shop, but if you don't control the media, then you can't communicate that to people. So I was speaking to two sets of people yesterday, one particular who was completely unaware of anything positive coming in terms of UK politics. And it's like, okay, well, it just depends what media you read and watch and see online. And that's why sometimes I feel like I almost have to be a cheerleader for the UK government at the moment, because literally no one else is. It's like there's a complete lack of ability to get through. Here's a good example, right? I put in Starmer into the search bar on Twitter, and this is the first thing that came up. right? Mature financier. Starmer is so effing evil, he needs deposing and removing from public life. He has zero sense of justice or humanity. A mechanical robot has more empathy. He sooner wastes billions in Ukraine on a lost cause. Okay, so what you're seeing here is probably a Russian bot, right? Or Russian troll. But this is replicated right across the internet, and not all the time from trolls and bots. So there's a lot of reform rhetoric that looks really similar to this. There's a lot of hate for Starmer that is just completely unjustified. He's like a bit of a meh human being, but he's decent. If you look at his public service throughout his life, this guy is definitely a decent human being. It has far more justice and humanity than any of the previous governments, I would argue, in terms of their cabinet and whatnot. Just it is so infuriating to see that all the cards are stacked against the government for trying to message at the moment. So anyway, there is that, and then there's the other. Before we get to the other side, there's this idea that actually Starmer is going to try and get closer to the EU. Financial Times just reporting we will use the EU summit, so there's an EU summit coming, to further unwind Brexit, vows Starmer. And so I think you're going to see Brexit now become a bit of a battleground because Labour are going to need to differentiate themselves very significantly from Reform. The Conservative Party don't really know what they're doing. We've just had Cami Badenoch announce that she doesn't want to have anything to do with centrists, basically. So now you've got Ed Davey from the Liberal Democrats in the UK saying, well, if Cami Badenoch says you don't want centrists, then you can all come, you One Nation Tories, you old school Conservative liberal moderates, you can come to the Lib Dems. And it looks like Kemi Badenoch really does want to take the Tory party to be Reform 2.0, which I think is a ridiculous, I think, strategic decision, because you can't out populism Nigel Farage and Reform. You just can't. And what will happen is Tories' vote will then get even more decimated by Reform, rather than trying to solidify a different position on the spectrum that differentiates themselves, from the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, and Reform, and they could be somewhere in the middle there. But now the Tories are we're going to be just another version of Reform, but try and hold on to the tradition and maybe the funding to some degree, although they're losing a lot of that, and the infrastructure that the Conservative Party has. So anyway, I think it's going to come down to Brexit. And here's an example of this. So you've got, this is just some random source online, Starmer and Labour could reverse their poll decline and help the UK economy by committing to rejoin the EU and reversing Brexit. It would also expose Farage and Reform as the incompetent liars who are responsible for the mess. So that's what you're seeing a lot of at the moment, is people calling for Labour to do this, because actually that's how they need to forge a path that sets them, I think, as being different from kind of where they have been from themselves previously, because actually that doesn't seem to have made it through in terms of messaging the chaos of UK politics. If they just say very clearly, okay, we're going for closer relationship with the EU, maybe even joining the customs union or the single market or whatever it is, that is a viable, and probably more than viable, probably a desirable position for them. But of course, they're going to probably lose a number of their working class voters that they may have been trying to get back post-Brexit. Now Brexit's done, they bring back their working class, kind of more unionized voters. They could lose them again to Reform. The problem with Reform is they don't have much past immigration. When you get past immigration, actually a lot of their policies are not good for the working class, right? They want to essentially scrap the welfare state. They want to get rid of the NHS. They want to do this. They want to do that. Those things are generally unpopular with the working class, but there's this desire for a lot of reformers to just get behind the anti-immigration thing and maybe the Brexit thing and just think, right, that's it. As long as they're big on that, I can excuse them and everything else that I might not agree with. But anyway, you're starting to see a few interesting nuggets come out. An internal FBI counterintelligence briefing flagged Britain's failure to investigate Russian interference in Brexit. This wasn't gossip, it was briefed to senior US law enforcement officials. The UK didn't take it seriously, others did. So it's going back a little bit in time, but that's something that I think still needs to be sorted out. This is something Carol Cadwalader and John Sweeney and others are still campaigning for there to be a proper investigation into Russian interference into Brexit. And I think, when I look at sources like this, you think it's got Russian fingerprints all over it. Starmer is so effing evil. No, he's not. Like, give over. Anyway, the point is that the stats at the moment are not looking good for Brexit, for the idea that Brexit was a good decision. So we've now gone up to sort of 56% saying it was wrong to leave, 31% saying it was right to leave, and then a whole lot of others in the middle. But there's a lot of Brexit regret, and then rejoining is pretty popular as well. Particularly, you go to places like Scotland. Scotland strongly supports undoing Brexit. A recent 2026 poll shows 73% of Scots would vote for the UK to rejoin the European Union, while just 27% would vote to remain out. A 46% plus 46 net rating in favour of undoing Brexit, so on and so forth. The support for EU membership has nearly doubled over the last decade. So, wow. And I think the right understands this. Reform understands this, that it could be something that's going to be relitigated, and you're starting to see there being campaign to kind of blame Brexit being done badly. Of course, the people who did it badly are now the people who are serving in the Reform Party as MPs that have defected. So there's been a bunch of defections that have taken place over the last few weeks. But again, these are the people who gave you the Brexit. So Daily Express, one of the arch Brexiteer newspapers, says now you must give Britain a proper Brexit. I mean, it's just incredible that is a headline still, 2026. That's today's headline. Nigel Farage, Kemi Badenoch and Boris Johnson back our new campaign to stop the betrayal. So you've got the Conservative Party now doubling down on Brexit, Nigel Farage, obviously, and Boris Johnson as well, who was the one that gave you Brexit. Yeah, now you must give Britain a proper Brexit. These people who are backing that campaign, Boris Johnson and Kemi Badenoch, they were the people that gave you that Brexit. Now we must have a proper one. Well, why wasn't it proper before? Do you know what I mean? It's just like no one seems to be able to, from the hardcore sort of Brexiteer camp, be able to admit that it wasn't a good idea or it wasn't done well, or admit who was to blame for that. Probably some nebulous kind of Brexit was just badly done, but I'm not going to concentrate on who that was that badly did it, because I really like Boris Johnson and I kind of like the Conservatives and so on and so forth. It's like, no, that's what they gave you. And Reform. So as we move on to talk more explicitly about Reform, it's interesting to see their optics at the moment, their positioning. They're really doubling down on support for Trump and Trumpist policies. So it's a lot of people are warning, if you vote Reform, you will get Trumpian policies. And look where that's got the United States of America at the moment. There are massive protests across the US. The last 24 hours has seen San Francisco, Chicago, loads of places, obviously Minneapolis, come out and say, no, this is not cool. And here we've got a Reform. It's Joseph Boehm, who's a Reform councillor up north. He's pretty controversial, but I stand with ICE. Just when ICE is across the board fairly unpopular in the UK, it's like, no. Shortly after ICE murdered Alex Pretty, Boehm posted this across his social media accounts. And at the same time, you've got Darren Grimes, another Reform councillor here, wearing a Trump t-shirt and a Trump cap. Make America great again. Trump never surrender. So this is a positioning of at least a large part of Reform. And you have Nigel Farage being the person who criticised Donald Trump the least after all the NATO shenanigans that took place over the last sort of few weeks. And so, I think that's an interesting dynamic that needs to be explored, certainly. Anyway, so let's look at, for those who aren't that au fait with British politics, let's look at what's been going on recently and remind ourselves of what I'm going to show you is these guys hoisted by their own petard. These guys ruined by their own words, or at least that's how it should be, but everyone ignores this kind of stuff. Nigel Farage is just an outright liar, okay? And that's apparently okay because, hey, you look at Trump, he can lie his face off routinely on a daily basis, and he still seems to be popular with his base.
My message to you is clear, plain, and simple. Never trust a Tory. Did you get that? I'll repeat it. Never trust a Tory. They will always let you down. They will always betray you. Reform UK are the real deal. My message.
Never trust a Tory. And now he's just had defections from all these Tories that he's just said never trust a Tory about. Absolutely incredible. One of them is one of my local MPs. Actually, I'm not in her constituency. I'm in the Borough Council of Fareham, but actually it falls under Gosport and Stubbington. But she is otherwise my kind of local MP. Suella Braverman, has defected to Reform, and her and a number of these others who have gone have been really at the rightwards extreme of the Conservative Party, and it's absolutely no surprise that she is and she's a big hitter, but that she has gone to Reform. As the Financial Times says, Tories should be glad Suella Braverman has gone to Reform, but Kemi Badenoch refuses the opportunity to urge that Reform opposes many of her party's finest achievements. So there you go. So she has gone, one of a whole bunch. Indeed, all the Tories linked with joining Reform UK. So now we have a load more that are being linked with leaving. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Katie Lamb. You've got Mark Francois. You've got Liz Truss, who's seen as probably too poisonous to go. But there is definitely going to be, I think, a continued exodus, or at least trickle of Conservative MPs going to Reform, and that gives Reform at least this air of experience that they are completely lacking with their present, I think, suite of politicians. But you've had Rosendale, you've had Danny Kruger, so he's sort of a Christian nationalist, anti-abortion guy, sort of typical MAGA type. If he's in the US, he'd be a MAGA like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just there are Nadine Dorries, like people in the Conservative Party who I really don't like, but that is the sort of direction of flow I'd expect, which is your more populist, your more extreme Conservatives going to Reform. Here's Nigel Farage talking again of late.
But there was one thing that he did say that I have to take issue with. He said, NATO have never given us anything back. And I will object to that politely.
Okay, so where Keir Starmer came out and said it was insulting and frankly appalling, he said, I'm going to object politely.
Saying this, when the decision was made to go into Afghanistan, we went in with America and a coalition of the willing. We stayed by America for the whole 20 years. We proportionately spent the same money as America. We lost the same number of lives as America, pro rata. And the same applies actually to Denmark and other countries too. So it's not quite fair. But there was one.
Not quite fair. I'd object politely. I'd take issue with. So really, there is this reticence to oppose Donald Trump really significantly. Starmer condemned Trump's comments. Ed Davey from the Lib Dems condemned Trump's comments. Badenoch condemned Trump's comments. And that from Farage came quite late. So up to this point, he hadn't said anything. Hello, darkness, my old friend. There was this silence from Farage. And then eventually he did, because he read the tea leaves in public sentiment there. But yeah, Carol Cadwallader here talking about... let's listen to this. Talking with the Green leader Zach Polanski here. I've got a lot of time for Carol Cadwallader, talking about Nigel Farage and this idea that he's the everyman sort of British, representative of the working class type thing.
Ongoing frustration with Nigel Farage, which has only now just started to change, is that he is seen as this, he's an English figure. He wears tweed. He goes to the pub. we see him through the lens of this sort of way that we've always looked at our politics. He has received almost no journalistic scrutiny throughout his entire career until very recently. And the whole thing is with Nigel Farage, he's not that cuddly, cozy golf club, English pub figure. He is absolutely in a relationship with the US far right, and he's absolutely in a relationship with the European pro-Kremlin far right. Actually, they're both pro-Kremlin, of course, because that's what the US far right is. And you can see absolutely in so many ways that what happened in Brexit was we saw that money, that force, that influence, and we saw that money, that force, and that influence, and those networks coming together at this moment when we had this, innovative new technology. It was the first real political campaign in Britain, which was like run through these online platforms, and they ran amok. That was why it just blasted through electoral law, data law, everything else. We're living with the consequences. Our constitution changed, the shape of Europe changed, our national security, all as a downstream effect of that. And here is Nigel Farage in this pole position now to potentially take power. And again, I still feel we're not understanding the consequences of that. If you look at what Trump is doing in the US, the way that he had a plan of what to do when he took office, Farage is starting now. They're communicating and working with the same people. There is going to be a all-out assault, I would say, in the same way on the rule of law and our institutions. And
well, it's already happening, in fact.
It's already happening, but again, it's like the stakes of that, I feel, are really underfelt by most people. It's an abstract, whereas this is where we have to attend to what is happening in America and to learn those lessons and to really see and understand that what is coming for us, unless we do really, really start thinking about how to stop that.
Fascinating there. So anyway, to go back to these defectors, Reform now has Boris Johnson's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi. So he is defected. The Community Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries. Attorney General, Suella Braverman. Political Secretary, Danny Kruger. Skills Minister, Andrea Jenkins. Northern Powerhouse Minister, I don't know the first name of Berry. Health Minister, Caulfield. Parliamentary Private Secretary Nicky, Assistant Whip Holloway, and Scottish Minister Offord. The old band getting back together. The idea here is that if you expected Reform to be this different, this reformed kind of way of looking at politics and dealing with British politics, it isn't. It is just Tories 2.0. End of. Reform, the change the country need. Team Johnson, Boris Johnson, that's what Zahawi, Jenrick, Braverman. Team Truss, when Liz Truss has that disastrous spell, Zahawi, Jenrick, Braverman. Team Farage, Nadawi, Jenrick, Braverman. Tory 2.0. And here's another one. Reform UK's official political strategy, where you've just got, maybe if we just put a Groucho Marx nose and glasses on them, then there'll be someone different. So all of these people, Nadine Dorries, Zahawi, you got Danny Kruger down there, Andrea Jenkins. Yeah, they're the same. You're not fooling us. Okay, so how can anyone think Reform are a party of change when they only appear to be the caregiver for the old Tories? I think this is an amazing comment on BBC Question Time from an audience member.
Yes. How can anyone think Reform are a party of change when they only appear to be a care home for old Tories? Yes.
A care home for old Tories is how that's seen. And then you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg being questioned.
As Immigration Minister, Suella Braverman.
Robert Jenrick being questioned by Victoria Derbyshire here on BBC Newsnight.
How many failed former Tory ministers are Reform going to accept? Number of asylum hotels peaked under Robert Jenrick as immigration minister. Suella Braverman was sacked twice as Home Secretary. Nadine Dorries brought in the Online Safety Act, which Reform dislikes. Many people love it. Nadeem Zahawi sacked after it emerged he'd been investigated by HMRC for not paying enough tax when he was Chancellor, not to mention claiming expenses from taxpayers for heating his stables.
Well, you must ask these questions of Reform about who they're going to take. It's not really for me. It's not really for me to defend.
No, I'm not asking you to defend it. Is it a fair criticism?
The only thing I'd say, it's not particularly a Boris thing, that a lot of people were in ministerial office, about however many it is, have gone, but quite a number of them are actually sacked by Boris one way or another. So I wouldn't read too much into that, and Boris definitely isn't going.
Okay. Well, Nigel Farage has said he wouldn't accept him anyway because of the so-called Boris wave.
Well, I think one or two other people weren't going to be accepted at various points. So, I wouldn't.
Okay, fair enough.
You better get him on oath too. Have everyone taking oaths on Newsnight. No, Nigel Farage.
Right.
So Nigel Farage will say one thing about these people and then just take them in with open arms at another point. And it's becoming, I think,
and I would ask Andrew,
more and more apparent. It's becoming more and more apparent that things like the NHS are on the chopping block, really, for reform. Here's another excerpt.
Time's coming down. And I would ask Andrew a question, because the new party that you've joined, your leader believes in a private insurance model. You believe in the NHS?
Private insurance, yes or no?
We need an efficient system that works. And
yes or no, private insurance?
We don't have. I don't object to that, but we need.
Oh, right. We've heard it here first.
Efficiency.
Time's coming down.
So I don't object to a private insurance system. So that's the end of the NHS under reform, which should be incredibly controversial. But, people end up being brainwashed by, I don't know if brainwash is the right idea. Cognitive dissonance reduction does an awful lot, doesn't it? So you take on reform and then you end up not being able to understand the nuance of your decisions, so you end up changing all of your politics because you've jumped in with, say, reform, and this can happen any which way, right? But rather than say, oh yeah, I really agree with this, but I really disagree with that, and pick and choose what you feel strongly about based on your own kind of background and your own rationale, you go, oh, now with reform, I have to agree that the NHS does need completely destroying, and I have to, and suddenly all of your politics changes because you've jumped in with this identity of being reform. But anyway, so Zia Yusuf is this guy in reform, big guy. He went away for a bit because there's a controversy to do with burqas that he didn't like. Then he came back, and now he's just one of the big spokespeople for reform. He's on all the programs and everything. Zia Yusuf coming out and getting embroiled in some controversy to do with Keir Starmer and EHCR, so human rights legislation, or European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, to do with, I believe, veterans, and I don't know if it's to do with potential war crimes or whatever in Afghanistan or Iraq. Anyway, I haven't really looked too closely into this, but Zia Yusuf saying this may be the most disgusting thing Starmer's ever done. Difficult to say which is the most disgusting thing Zia Yusuf has ever done. There are so many examples. He's clearly competing for attention with Jenrick and Braverman. The idea that he's coming on and giving so much, respect and love for Braverman and Jenrick and whatnot, when he's been on record slagging them off previously, it is pretty hilarious. Here's an example of this. Breaking, Zia Yusuf says Reform UK, this is going back a few weeks, will repeal the Online Safety Act and attacks Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, the Conservative Party. This is going back to when I believe the Conservatives were probably in charge and starting to create the Online Safety Act. Quote, the people who did this, by the way, were the Tories, including the ones who now present themselves as against all this. So this is after Labour, but they started the Online Safety Act. People like Suella Braverman, people like Robert Jenrick, who in my view represent the most insidious form of politician, right? So you got Yusuf here going to town on Braverman and Jenrick, and just a few weeks later, welcoming them with open arms into Reform UK. It's like, how can we trust anything you say if you just go do a complete 180 switcheroo at the drop of a hat? Zia Youssef, Keir Starmer hates our military and hates this country. There's this idea that you're trying to really key into that sense of nationalism and try and get those veterans on your side, like we saw just before. This is what Zia Youssef is saying again, and I love this reply. I'm a veteran. I don't support Labour, but if it were a choice between just Reform and Labour, I'd choose Labour. Starmer called out JD Vance and Trump when they pissed on us veterans. Your leader did not. Stop gaslighting us. Many of us veterans see straight through you. There's been a bit of this small movement on online of for veterans to go against Reform, because actually, you know, you think Reform are real proud, you know, flag wearing nationalists, but actually they would happily sell us down a river and denigrate us at any opportunity, denigrate the country at any opportunity, and then say how wonderful Trump is and how wonderful blah blah blah. And you're thinking, really, do you love the country? Because it doesn't sound like you do. This is Luke Charters, who's an MP for Labour, saying the following, which I think is a fairly salient point.
Have you seen this video?
You go to the UKIP conference, which we had in Birmingham in September. It was more like a festival than a party conference. Reform, sorry.
So let's get this right. That's the Tory Home Secretary next to the Reform leader who's calling his own party UKIP. Just a few years ago, he was the leader of the Brexit party. Are you following all of this yet? Reform's not change. They're just a rebrand of the Tory party who absolutely destroyed public services in this country. So ask them how they'll fix the NHS. Ask them how they'll lower bills. Ask them how they'll build the homes of the future. It's all soundbite slogans like common sense. They've got no plan whatsoever. They're the same Muppets with the same failed ideas. It's just a different logo with added outrage. Braverman generates a Howie, Dorries, Anderson. All total Tory failures. Look, I see through it. The public sees through it. So let's call Reform exactly what they are. Turquoise Tories.
And actually, he's spot on there. Like, that's exactly what they've taken. And there is definitely this issue with the Reform that they don't have the expertise and they don't have the policy. They're very good at shouting. And we've seen this from Farage over time. Very good at shouting from the sidelines, not very good at actually leading. I was reading an account the other day of someone that used to work with Nigel Farage saying he was horrible to work with. He's really vindictive. Every kind of big organization he is in charge of kind of falls apart. There's lots of infighting. You know, UKIP, it happened with Brexit Party, now Reform. It's going to be interesting to see whether you can keep the Reform together when essentially it's just Tory 2.0, and he's got this weird mix of people that will be working class up to people who are elitist who want to just deregulate society so that they can make money off X, Y, and Z. So you got your political and financial elitists up here, of which Farage is one. He's not your everyman. He is an elitist. He's a public school, gold bullion, commodities selling, rich guy who sells himself as going down a pub with the everyman, as this kind of appeal to the working class. But that attracts a working class over. You've got ideas of being strong against immigration, but then when you get past that, well, what are you going to do that's going to appeal to the working class here, but also to the financial elites up here? And that's the problem that Reform have, not from just me trying to beat Reform because I don't like their politics. It's really from a pragmatic point of view. I see them as having a really tough task of appealing to quite a bizarre mix that they have in their base. And another guy that moved across is Priti Patel, an MP that I would expect to go to Reform, actually. She was one that I'd be thinking she's very similar as a former Home Secretary, very hard on immigration, very similar to Suella Braverman. Andrew Rossendale, who was another Tory that's just gone to Reform, is a complete hypocrite. He campaigned for the settlement with Mauritius. So what's going on here? Well, I've talked to you before about the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia and the agreement with Mauritius that we pay Mauritius over time for us to still have control over Diego Garcia and for there to be an American base. The Americans agreed with that. Trump commended it back in February last year. And then in May last year, there was an official statement from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying it was a great deal, blah, 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 blah. So the Americans were fine with it until they got together and discussed stuff with like your Farage side of things, and Kemi Badenoch met with Mike Johnson. And then Trump came out and slagged it off. I presume he didn't realize he had previously commended it, had probably forgotten that, slagged it off because there's political opportunism there. Keir Starmer then recognized that in public and said it was political opportunism. But they are going to, I think, now have a look at the actual deal that they're doing with Mauritius here. But Andrew Rossendale, who was a guy that's just gone over to Reform, when Reform are slagging off the Chagos deal, that's one of the things they're going up in arms about at the moment in Parliament. Andrew Rossendale says Patel is a complete hypocrite. He campaigned for the settlement with Mauritius in line with the exact International Court of Justice, ruling that Keir Starmer has used as a basis to hand over Chagos, the ruling that says Britain should not be sovereign over the islands. And you know, the evidence is there. This is Andrew Rossendale sending a letter showing that he actually believed the exact opposite to what he's now saying with his Reform buddies, his newfound Reform buddies. I think it's 100% right that the Tories are highlighting this. Reform strut around pretending that they are behind the Chagosians, and Rossendale appears to deny his own history. So it's going to be very difficult for these former Tory MPs and donors and mayors and wherever they're getting all of their present MPs from. They're not all previous, you know, for example, Nigel Farage wasn't an MP before. This is the first time he's been an MP. I think it was the 8th time of asking, but he's previously a Conservative Party donor. And, you know, going back, everyone that's anything to do with the Reform at the moment is previously had something to do with supporting the Conservative Party, right? And that makes it very difficult for Reform to slag off how terrible and broken Britain is, because the people who are responsible for that, for being in charge for 14 years, are the people that they've now got as their MPs. So the level of hypocrisy you are going to see from Reform, I think, will be pretty off the charts. Now, this is the former Deputy Prime Minister, Lib Dem, went off after the coalition with the Conservatives from 2010 onwards, went off to after he came out of government, and then went off to work for Meta, actually, in Facebook. Here he is speaking on LBC.
There's nothing wrong with saying, look, we thought this was going to turn out differently. The people who advocated have clearly failed, and they had their chance. They had hardline Brexiteers in power. Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. When I hear Nigel Farage, who, by the way, gets away scot-free, I mean, his great achievement in life is a disaster for this country, and no one holds him to account.
Well, in what way should he be held to account, Sir Nick?
Because he's the author of this lost decade, and he's sort of preening himself as if he might be the next prime minister. And the problem is the other parties don't want to take him on because they don't want to talk about Brexit. In the end, countries, like individuals or families, you can't keep living a lie. There's nothing wrong with...
And that pretty much says it for me. Nick Clegg there really laying it on that people are afraid to talk about Brexit, but actually, you know, this should be the petard over which, if this makes sense, Farage is hoisted. And then, you know, all is not well then when we look at Reform-run councils in the UK. We're all putting up their council taxes, sort of locally run councils where Reform have done really well in local elections. They've actually shown themselves to be not competent in running councils because, hey, turns out that if you're only interested in immigration, doesn't mean that you've got the chops to do the job of running a council. You know, sorting out potholes, children and adult services, you know, elderly care and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, are you interested in that, or are you just interested in immigration? Because if you're just interested in immigration and being all Trumpy, then perhaps it's not the job for you. And there have been sort of all sorts of controversies going up and down the country in these councils. I think I missed this mass resignation of 10 Reform councillors in Derbyshire. Apparently they're falling out with Farage over his leadership style. So there you go. Again, to mention that leadership style issue. So then when you have people like Suella Braverman going across to Reform, you wonder about anything they ever say, because anything they previously said appears to now be kind of disproven or defunct by their move to Reform. I'm delighted, said Suella Braverman back whenever. I'm delighted that Liz Truss has been elected the leader of the Conservative Party. I'm confident she will make the bold action needed to get all of us through these tough times, grow our economy, and unleash the potential of the UK. Congratulations, Kemi Badenoch, on becoming the new leader of the Conservative Party. Our party can now turn the page and start a new chapter. Because obviously the previous chapter that she was championing previously obviously wasn't good. If we are to serve the British people successfully, the Conservative Party needs unity, stability, and skills to fix the challenges we face. This is why I'm proud to support Rishi Sunak to be our leader and Prime Minister. Okay, right. I'm standing to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister herself. I have the experience and the vision to get Britain back on track, and I don't buckle under pressure. Of course, she didn't make that leadership bid. Proud to be part of the modern Conservative Party thanks to our leadership of Boris Johnson. Our party is open, meritocratic, and diverse. Resilience and grace, dedicated public servant and leader. Proud to be on your team, Theresa May. Hope your cold gets better. Oh, that's nice. Well done, David Cameron. Strong leadership for the party and for the UK. So just like right throughout time. Okay. So as Harry Eccles says, funny that Suella Braverman, you were delighted when Liz Truss became PM. You supported Kemi when she became leader. You were proud to support Rishi. You were proud of Boris too. You even stood for Tory leader yourself and didn't get it though. So you've been proudly part of Britain's decline for a long time. So if you're now with Reform slagging off broken Britain for 14 years of decline, then that's on you, that is. That's on you. And now that's on Reform for taking you on board. And I think you've got someone else in the audience at BBC Question Time also saying the right thing here. Before we go there, it's worth noting that Nigel Farage previously has called out for any defectors to move party, to have a by-election. It should trigger an election. You vote them in on account of they are representative of that party. They then change a party once you voted them in. You need a new election. You can't just then suddenly switch to being a new party because that's not who you voted for. It's the person you voted for, but not the party you voted for. So it should be a by-election, and rightly so. And that's what Nigel Farage has previously said. Now you've seen a whole bunch of defections. He's being very quiet on by-elections now. How convenient. Anyway, here's someone at BBC Question Time.
I think a lot of the Tories who defected to the Reform Party were always perhaps racist and wanted to push an agenda that was disgusting, frankly, but they've just found a party that they could do it with. I honestly think general consensus, particularly amongst young people, is that we've lost our humanitarianism, and the only party that is showing any semblance of that is Green at the minute, frankly. And we're so fixated on the economy, on wealth, on so many other things, but we're just neglecting the fact that we are all humans and that we are not looking after one another. And none of Labour, Tories, Reform, none of you offer that security, particularly to young people who are so exasperated with just generally the state of the world and how we are treating each other. I think
interesting views. Of course, you could argue the economy is the basis of the ability to do all of other things. But anyway, there's an interesting view there from a young person. Those just flashed onto the screen. Is it Constantine? Is it Kieran? A guy from Trigonometry podcast was on the panel there, but he overtly lied when he was on there, which just infuriates me. Okay. And then there's this, the last thing I'm going to show you, just a random by-election that has happened on a council, albeit, not going to have huge turnout, I'm sure. But this is up in East Dunbartonshire in Scotland, Bearsden South, council by-election. Just like, what does this tell us? It's all over the shop. So Reform for the first time ever are on the ballot here, 15.5%, but well below Lib Dems getting 38.1%, moving up 15%. The SNP which you thought they might have had a bit of a renaissance there. 17.2%, down 6.2. Labour 14.2%, down 1.9. So not too bad there actually. Greens 8.1%, up 0.9. Conservatives 6.2%, down 17. So the Conservatives there wiped out by the Reform vote coming along and broadly taking most of the vote off the Conservatives, and maybe just 1.5% else. No, actually, some of the Conservatives leaking elsewhere. So I find that really interesting. What does that tell you going forward? Will Reform decimate the Conservatives? Will there be a split vote still going on there? There's now going to be, I'll leave you with this, there's going to be, and there's a lot of people talking about this at the moment, a by-election in Manchester, in Denton. Is it Gorton and Denton? Denton, Gorton? Where it's going to be hotly contested between Reform, Labour and Green. So being up north and in Manchester is likely to skew to Labour, just historically speaking, one of these urban areas in the north. But you've seen this move towards Reform over time. And now they've selected a guy called Matt Goodwin, who I despise anyway. He is very big on the socials, but he's also, appears on Question Time. He's become more and more extreme. He's just received support from Tommy Robinson for running for that seat. So you can see that we're really getting to this point of it's MAGA Britain style or AFD Britain style against established parties. And what I don't want up there would be Greens and Labours to split each other's vote, because they both look like they're going to get an okay vote share. But if they get an okay vote share and Reform get everything else, then Reform are going to get through. That is going to be a real test up in that seat in Manchester. So that is one to watch really, really closely, particularly because Reform have picked quite a big gun for that one. The Labour have just selected a woman to run for that, and Greens have got a woman, a plumber who's formerly run for a different seat in the area, but she's quite a good choice as well. Both of the Labour and Greens could be interesting choices, and then Matt Goodwin there. So whatever happens there will give us a real indication of what's going on in British politics right now, because I think you're starting to get some green shoots of resurgence here for Labour, because things are going okay politically, like as in economically, and in terms of the things they are getting on and doing with the quite large mandate, with quite a big majority in Parliament. They can make some big decisions, get stuff done, and they are doing that, but they're working against the entire media establishment in trying to get this stuff done, or at least trying to communicate their successes. Everything we read about the Labour government is negative in the print press, in the news media, and in the social media spaces. It's just a massive assault on Keir Starmer and Labour. But the reality is that things are probably a good deal better than that. But going forward over the next couple of years and into the next general election, the question for Labour is how much do they get into bed with this idea of rejoin the EU or getting closer to the EU, and do that much more formally? And actually, are we going to see Brexit re-litigated in the next election? Because it is being talked about an awful lot, and it could be a pathway for economic growth for the UK. So watch this space. Anyway, just thought I'd give you my general thoughts on everything going on in this context. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.